Hello, this is Angela DiCarlo, and welcome to Product Mentors Facebook Fridays. I am here live in Panama City Beach, Florida today. It's beautiful. Mike is in San Diego, California. Where are you tuning in from? Please post your name and location in the comments so we can see where in the world you are. All right. Well, if you also have any questions, please post them in the chat box, either on Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever you're watching this great educational program from. Now let's get started. Mike Corradini is the founder and CEO of ProductMentor. He graduated from the entrepreneurship school at USC. Go Trojans! He is a fourth generation entrepreneur. And for the past 20 years, he has dedicated his life to entrepreneurship. Mike has successfully launched numerous seven-figure businesses and developed two companies that made the Inc. 500 list. His team has managed over 250 startups, and they teach based on experience, not theory. All right, Mike, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Hello, Angela. Happy Friday. How are you doing?
Amazing.
Good. Well, it's great to see you, and thank you for that introduction. Every entrepreneur, would-be entrepreneur, inventor, business owner, you name it, they all come across the same question at some point. And that is my idea viable, right? Does it have legs? This is one of the most common questions that I hear, and one of the main things that I see that holds people back from actually pursuing their idea, because of course they want to know before they take that first step whether it's something that they should actually pursue. And so I think the best way to illustrate this, Angela, is how it started with me, because when I started my first business many years ago, it was an internet security company, and I followed my passion instead of following the needs of the customer. And after about 3 months, Angela, we didn't have one customer, not even a single one. And as you can imagine, it was extremely frustrating because I wanted to serve people and I had value. And so what I stumbled upon was I picked up the phone and I started asking people that didn't buy why. Everything made sense to me, but I needed to understand the customer and what they were feeling and thinking. And this was a paradigm shift for me. The information that I received led me to eventually making this company a huge success, because I was able to change it and tailor it based on what my customers actually wanted. And so what started, I should say, is a complete failure. I was able to then change and mold and pivot into something that was wildly successful once I started listening to the customer.
So important. The customer is the people who are going to fund the company and keep it growing. It is so important. It's so important. So what is the traditional way that you see people pursuing a new product or app?
Yeah, so and you'll probably see this format a lot. I like to always start with, the myths or what people currently think is the right way to do things. And the number one mistake, Angela, literally the number one thing that entrepreneurs do that cause them to fail is they build a product or an app or a service, whatever it is, for themselves, right? They think that, hey, if I would like this, then the market's going to like it too. It's the whole cliche, build it and they will come. And unfortunately, too many entrepreneurs rely on that mantra, build it and they will come. And it doesn't really work that way, other than very rare cases where you just get lucky and find your product market fit, which is the alignment you're looking for. You have the market and you have your product. And when they align, you make sales because you're giving the market what it wants. Very rarely does an entrepreneur get that right off the bat or on their own intuitions. And so, the customer has to guide your creation process. I cannot reiterate that enough. If you don't let them guide your creation process, and if I didn't in the internet security company I started 20 something years ago, that company would have never made any money and it would have just folded.
So true. You're hitting the nail on the head there. I see that so many times with entrepreneurs. So how do you do it different? How does Product Mentor validate new ideas?
So there's several ways that you can validate your new idea. One of my favorite ways, though, is online surveys, especially again in these COVID times. It's a lot easier doing online surveys than going and meeting people in person, just because of the nature of what's going on. And so online surveys are great. It gives you a nice feeling for what people are thinking, what price point that they would consider buying your product. And if they're not considering buying your initial idea, under what conditions they would purchase it, which when you ask those open-ended questions, you get a lot of the blanks filled in, where if you only ask close-ended questions like yes, no's, or multiple choice. My other favorite way, Angela, is with focus groups. All right, focus groups are a little more handy if it's a very specific demographic. A lot of times when you do online surveys, you're getting kind of a mass population survey, where if you need a very specific type, let's just say like gamers, right? People that play video games online, and you're making a game of your own, then that probably is going to require a focus group so that you can go into that more specific type of demographic and get the feedback you need, since the general population doesn't necessarily play video games. So a lot of it depends on how mass scale your idea is. The other way, though, is crowdfunding. Kickstarter is the most popular platform out there. Of course, there's Indiegogo and other ones as well. But maybe you've seen this, Angela. A lot of times when you get backed on Kickstarter, you'll see somebody's website actually promote that. And they'll say, we were Kickstart funded. And it adds a tremendous amount of credibility because, again, if you were able to get through that gauntlet, right, if people backed your project on Kickstarter, then you can say that it's viable because, again, people vote with their wallets, right? It's one thing to do a survey or a focus group. It's quite another to actually vote with your credit card or your debit card. And then finally, my favorite, which is somewhat of a flavor of Kickstarter, is pre-orders, typically on your own website. And so pre-orders and crowdfunding are almost synonymous. The main difference is when you do it on a platform like Kickstarter, you have a lot of rules. You're in their kingdom. And when you do pre-orders on your website, you get to make more of the rules. For example, on Kickstarter, if you don't hit your goal in a certain amount of time, everybody gets refunded. And all of that marketing effort that you put forth goes to the wayside. On your website, you can theoretically extend it as long as needed until you hit your goal, as long as, of course, you're communicating with those early backers that pre-ordered your product, your service, your software, whatever it is.
That's all great information. I've definitely helped people with Kickstarter before. It's not an easy thing. It's something that has to be properly planned and executed correctly to make it happen, just like every other part of marketing and brand development.
Absolutely. And the thing you have to also understand is that your original idea may not be viable at all. And that's okay, right? You want to go into this process being very flexible, with the understanding that your ultimate idea or concept could be totally different than how it originally started. And there's so many examples out there in the market today, which we won't go into right now, but most of the major companies that you see today, Angela, did not start with the same value proposition or niche that they eventually ended up becoming.
Absolutely. It is so true. So for all these people watching this and trying to learn about entrepreneurship, why do you feel that most entrepreneurs miss this step about the focus groups, the online surveys, the crowdfunding, the pre-ordering? Why do you think they miss that? Is it just missing in marketing in general, or do you have a new methodology that's worked well for you?
Well, kind of like with my internet security company 20 years ago, Angela, you don't know what you don't know. So I think in a lot of cases, entrepreneurs, even experienced entrepreneurs, this isn't just the newbies, they don't understand the importance of aligning the product and the market, back to the product market fit. They don't realize that that could be the determinant between you being successful and you spinning your wheels. So that's a big reason. The other reason is, people, they become very, we'll just say, fixated on that initial idea. And when somebody tries to tell them that their idea could work better another way, it's analogous to saying your baby is ugly, right? And I know you have a son, I have kids. If someone was to dare tell me my kids or your son was ugly, you immediately have this defense mechanism that goes up. And that defense mechanism is precisely what hurts so many would-be entrepreneurs, inventors, and business owners, because they take it personally instead of realizing that, hey, I should use this feedback as my North Star, as my compass. I shouldn't let it affect me. It's not a reflection on me at all. It's more a reflection on what the market wants.
Right. So, taking one person's opinion is one thing, but how many people do you usually include in a survey to feel like you've gotten a viable take on where your product can go?
That's a really good question, Angela, and I get asked that all the time. Typically, when we run our online surveys, we'll do anywhere from a couple hundred, maybe as many as 400 or 500 surveys, but you can usually get away with 100 to 200. And if you have a sample size of 100 to 200 surveys, you're going to get a really good idea whether you're on the right path, whether you should drop your idea altogether, or whether you should make a hard right turn, or as we like to say, pivot. With pre-orders, it's a little bit different as far as what's the threshold on pre-orders to consider your idea viable. And the threshold for me, that critical mass, is when you have enough pre-orders to do your first production run, right? When you actually can go back to your manufacturer, when you can go back to your software development company and you can say, all right, now I'm ready. Let's build version 1. And, version 1 is important because if you overdevelop your product or your software or your app right off the bat, you're going to create a much higher ceiling than is necessary for you to actually go to market, which is where the real learning begins, right? The learning never stops. Once you launch your product or app, now you have reviews on Amazon or you have reviews on the App Store, and then you learn even more, which again is your guidance for what direction you should grow your product or your app. So having enough pre-orders to build the first version or to do the first production run is what you should be focused on in order to determine that your idea is viable.
That is great information. Definitely knowing how many is useful, hitting the point where you actually fund your first order, that's a great level to think about. And of course, the customer feedback, trying not to take it personally, but taking it objectively and pulling information to improve your product. Those are all really great points. I know we want to keep this short. Do you have any other thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I do have some final thoughts. The first one is we all are risk adverse. Our very nature as human beings is we like to avoid pain, right? Again, one of those defense mechanisms. But my closing advice today is you can dramatically reduce your risk if you approach things a little bit differently than maybe you first envisioned. Again, if you don't get the pre-orders or the survey results that you anticipated, you really haven't risked a lot because you haven't developed, you haven't engineered, you haven't built the software or written any lines of code yet. So you're reducing your risk while at the same time establishing whether this is something you should pursue or more likely, Angela, how you should pursue it, right? Rarely is it dead on arrival. What usually happens if the feedback isn't good is it gives you the hints, right? The crumbs, if you will, to know what direction you should go. And so rarely is it just a yes or a no. Most of the time, it's somewhere in between that. And it's more, how do I reflect on this information and pivot accordingly? But really, it's possible, I guess, is the other main message I want to leave everyone with. You can do it. You can launch a product or app. It's absolutely possible, especially if you don't make the number one mistake, and that is build your product or app for yourself instead of for your customer. And the other thing is, most people are surrounded by negativity. I mean, it's almost a plague, if you will. Sometimes it's your family, sometimes it's your friends, sometimes it's your coworkers. And I talk to so many entrepreneurs, Angela, that they have this dream, they have this vision, and they go out there and there's all these people that try to hold them back, right? Hold them down. And unfortunately, they take those opinions, right? Because they're not advice. Advice is more substantiated. An opinion is not substantiated. They'll let those opinions destroy their ability from even taking that very first step. And it's just so heartbreaking to me. It's so sad that they're relying on these negative people to determine whether they should follow their dream. So don't let that happen to you. Let the market decide if your idea is viable, not your friends, not your family, not your coworkers, because although they may love you or like you at the very least, we hope, if they're your friend, right? They don't know. And neither do you, and neither do I. But I'll tell you who does, Angela: the market. The market knows, and that's why you want to approach your product and app launches the way we've described.
No, that's all really great stuff, and it's so true. Having the positive people around you, getting the feedback, and pushing forward on the product. Well, I know we want to wrap it up here today, so we're back here next Friday, and we will be sharing some other useful tips. If you have anything specific you want, please put it in the chat box, but we'll just keep pounding out the information that entrepreneurs are looking for, right, Mike?
That's right. We have a lot more to share than we have time to share. So we'll see everybody next week.
Bye.